iPredict works by gathering the knowledge of its 5,000 plus traders. If a stock has a price of 57 cents, that means the market thinks that event has a 57% chance of happening. If you agree, you buy. If you disagree, you short. And if you're right, you make money. Kia ora, good evening New Zealand. This is day 10 until the country goes to the polls. Welcome to iPredict Election 2011, the most accurate source of political and economic information in New Zealand broadcasting. Our three predictions tonight. Prediction 1. The iPredict market are predicting a 56% probability that the Epsom Tea Party tapes will show Key and Banks criticise Brash, and a 64% probability they discussed overthrowing Don. By bringing in the police, have National made an issue of perhaps a passing interest to the main topics of the campaign? Prediction 2. In the wake of the National Party billboard attacks, the iPredict market showed the Greens sliding to 10.9% party vote. By outing activists as vandals yesterday, have the Greens kept their middle class respectability, but will that alienate them from their activist base? Prediction 3. Welfare reform to intrusively drug test beneficiaries for work readiness haven't dented John Key's 93% probability that he will get elected as Prime Minister. Is beneficiary bashing the easiest way to gain votes in New Zealand? To dissect these predictions, let me introduce tonight's panel. The market says he has a 95% probability of winning Wellington Central, the 11th funniest person in the Labour Party caucus, Grant Robertson. And the market says he has a 98% probability of winning Tauranga, the only MP whose dress sense makes Winston Peters look shabby, the ever sartorial stylings of Simon Bridges. Yeah. Welcome to you both. We'll also wrap the show with the final prediction. Let's kick things off with tonight's first market prediction. iPredict are predicting a majority probability that Brash was the topic of the Epsom Tea Party tapes. But has the government's heavy-handed response made the storm in a teacup an election loser? Simon, in justifying the police action against media, Key has been forced to compare the microphone recording him to hacking into the phones of the family of a murdered child. I put to you that Stephen Joyce's strategy to overreact by gagging the media has been a terrible blunder, hasn't it?
I don't think so, because I think actually you have to distinguish between what is the right thing to do and actually perhaps what's the political thing to do. Now we can talk about the politics, but I think in terms of the right thing to do, I think it has personally been the right thing to do to complain to the police. I think this should be taken seriously. Well, because actually you're talking about covert surveillance. I think this is something of a precedent in New Zealand where journalists are doing this to politicians. So I think it did need to be treated seriously in that sense.
Do you think it's a bit hypocritical for a government that rammed through search and surveillance powers without all of the usual checks and balances to allow police to break into people's homes and spy on them illegally? Do you think it's a bit hypocritical for the Prime Minister to get all high and mighty about being recorded in this manner?
No, look, I don't. I mean, I think we live according to law, and the law is that, as I basically understand it, that what's happened here wasn't meant to happen, shouldn't happen, is unlawful. In fact, carries a 2-year term of imprisonment as a maximum. So I think that's the case. Look, I think the more fundamental point here, my basic view on what has happened, is that actually people of New Zealand basically aren't that interested in this, right? I don't think there's a really strong sense about, you know, should have done this, should have done that. Actually, I think they want to see John Key as leader of the National Party, Phil Goff as leader of the Labour Party, scrapping it out over the real issues and not getting distracted on this stuff. Now, what's happened today, where we've seen, as the media portray it, a walkout, adds, I suppose, a fly in the ointment into all of that. But if my office is anything to go by, we're getting a lot of calls of support for the Prime Minister and his stance. And so there's something of a wedge, if you like, between what's going on, what the Prime Minister's done, and the media, and their, in a sense, overhyping of this issue, I think.
Do you think the media have a responsibility to hold the powerful to account and sometimes have to actually take some information, if it's gained in manners that are a little bit questionable, that information should still come out, shouldn't it?
Look, yes, of course they do have an obligation to hold the powerful to account, but I also think they have a duty to be objective, and I suppose that Reithian BBC way, they need to decide what's important against some kind of benchmark. Is this the most important thing going on in the next week? Personally, I don't think it is. I think New Zealanders agree with me.
Grant, you've breathlessly rushed to John Key's defence to reiterate John Key has every legal expectation of privacy, but if the PM is saying one thing in public and another privately 2 weeks out from an election, surely the media have a responsibility to report on that.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. What I was saying was that people in New Zealand do have a right to private conversations. And nobody I've talked to thinks it's a good idea that we should allow covert taping. But let's look at what the event was. A gigantic media stunt where the media were invited to be there and were put outside after a little while, and then with what expectation? And so quite clearly to me, if there is hypocrisy, then there is a public interest test. But more than that, these situations in politics are often about how you handle what happens as opposed to what actually happens. And I agree with Simon, it's a gigantic distraction to talking about asset sales or the well-being of children or whatever the issues are that we want to be talking about. But John Key's made it that distraction. I think going to the police was a huge overreaction. I think comparing it to the news of the world was actually embarrassing and actually unacceptable. Bringing in youth suicide last night into the issue just made me feel queasy. And then I think what we've seen today is the Prime Minister under pressure and not wanting to talk about this issue. He could put this to bed tonight.
I think though there is, I mean, it's all very well where we say, look, politicians, you made this point, Bomber, they should be up front, they're powerful, we should be, etc., etc. But there is a sense where, you know, we walk into the studio, we joke around, we're informal, we perhaps say things that are somewhat loose, we go on, we're in a formal setting, and actually we're on our game. Now, clearly, when John Key was talking with John Banks, I don't know what's on the tape. I haven't heard it. I haven't seen a transcript. But clearly, if you look at the predominant opinion of those who've been who've read it, it's titillating, not sensational. There's no train breakers here.
But
I think you're absolutely right.
If you're going to have the media there, and they didn't say, right, that's it, go away, get out. They just pushed them outside the glass. I think you have to understand the difference between a media stunt gone wrong and some kind of expectation that New Zealanders would rightly have. No one's running around putting things under a table. It was a bag on the table. But in the end, it's about how you handle it and whether New Zealanders think you're being upfront. And I'm getting a variety of views. So I mean, I would take the point that some people are really focused on the privacy angle, but a lot of people, as the days go by, are saying there must be something he doesn't want us to hear. Now, it may well just be embarrassing, or it could be more, but it gives the impression that there's something on those tapes that's embarrassing for the Prime Minister.
Do you think it's a little bit like Helen Clark when she said that she painted that painting and then she didn't? And people would have just, oh, okay, that's just, well, whatever. But then having someone buy it and burn it, it's how you deal with it afterwards, right? That's what creates the perception and people, the bad mouth.
I'll tell you what I think actually happened today. I suspect what happened today was that the Prime Minister decided that he was going to try and make a point with the media and that he was going to say, I'm not going to answer any more questions
Will
about
that work
this.
with Duncan Garner?
Well, it won't, because and you know the digital equivalent of taking on people who order ink by the barrel. You have to be very careful to do that, and I suspect we'll see tapes of that throughout the next few days, and that's the stuff that voters will turn off.
I appreciate that, but I would come back to my basic point that is this going to shift votes one way or another? My frank view right now is it's not.
Well,
I don't think a Nat is going to suddenly say, oh, what have we been doing? Or a Labour
There are middle ground
But exactly, and here's my question to both of you on that. If the conversation has veered into comments about New Zealand First voters, has that increased the chances of a New Zealand First backlash getting above 5%? Because he's close now.
I don't think so. Look, I suppose there is a sense with the minor parties that the more publicity they get, and I think this actually happened last time for New Zealand First. I mean, I actually think the more publicity they got, even though it was bad publicity.
Well, but that was negative publicity, wasn't it?
No, sure, but I still think they were a 3% party that with all that publicity got themselves to 4 point something, right? So there's some sense of that, but I also think New Zealand First has a ceiling. I think it is difficult for New Zealand First to get past what they got last time. Now, if they do, where are those votes coming from? They're coming from my friend.
Are they coming from you?
I don't think so at all. I'm tempted to ask Simon why he thinks New Zealand First vote has a ceiling, but that could get us into an area that we don't want to be in. But what I would say is that I think Winston's got oxygen out of this.
Right.
And oxygen for Winston politically right now. He's going to be on a TV debate tonight.
What's to stop him from actually saying it?
I think you'll find Winston will make use of this, and I agree he's never going to be a massive party again. But I think there is potential for him to go over 5% as a result of this.
I also just to finish Labour.
No, I also think that it will actually come from National. I do honestly believe that soft,
older National Party voters who don't like the asset sales?
And I agree this isn't the biggest thing in the election cycle, but I do think this has the potential to shift some of those voters who are soft on National and concerned about the lack of a plan, concerned about what they might be doing in the future with assets, this can shift.
But funnily enough, though, if you think about that sort of voter, and I'm not
Yeah,
going to
yeah,
stereotype
yeah,
them
yeah,
too much
yeah,
because
yeah,
we've
yeah.
seen what that can do.
Yeah.
But if you think about that voter, actually, I think they will be quite respectful of kind of the strong tactics, if you like, of John Key today.
Okay.
He's done a walkout, right? You know, I mean, some of the criticism, I think the critique from the Trevor Mallards, perhaps the Grant Robertsons out there has been, oh, you know, smile and wave. Actually, here today, you've seen a Prime Minister who's been stronger than that, who's been prepared, yes, to take on the Duncan Carters and say, no, look, you know, you're not talking about trade, which is what I want to talk about. I'm not having this.
No, I don't buy that.
Question to both of you. At a 56% probability that the Epsom Tea Party tapes will show Key and Banks criticise Brash, would you buy it or short it?
I'd be buying that.
You'd be buying it? What?
Look, I'd hold, but I don't think the tapes. You know, I think this is the unpopular view, but I don't think those tapes with the transcript will come out before the
really?
election. I don't think they will.
I don't think the tape will, because I'm not sure it exists anymore.
Right.
Thank you, panel. Let's move on to prediction 2. In the wake of the National Party billboard attacks, the iPredict market showed the Greens sliding to 10.9% party vote. By outing activists as vandals yesterday, have the Greens kept their middle-class respectability, but will that alienate them from their activist base? Simon, Russell has been very upfront about this and has gone to some length to apologise.
Yeah.
Has this attack on National Party billboards damaged the possibility of a blue-green relationship post-election?
No, because I don't think it was particularly likely in any event,
okay,
right? Let's be frank. And also, let me give some kudos where it's deserved. I do think Russell Norman has handled this very well, right? I actually think he went out, he didn't have any ifs, any buts, he didn't do what Sue Bradford's been criticising for, you know, but gone sort of soft on frankly, people doing something illegal, so he was firm. I thought he handled it well. But I do think, ultimately, well, actually for a number of reasons, the Greens will go down. But in terms of this, my feeling is, look, this damages their brand. And what is their brand? They are the good guys, they are above politics, they're nice, they do Morris dancing, they smile, right? Actually, I think if you look at this, and I think also to some extent the Robert Malcolm comments, Robin, I'm sorry, Malcolm comments a week or so back, it takes the shine off. They are, in some ways, just like all the rest of us. Right?
I think it's absolutely true to say that from the Greens' point of view, they've been working really hard to establish that brand, that they're a bit more responsible than we were when Nandor was here or whatever. And so I do think it damages this. I was on a radio talkback show in Wellington today, and the messages and the calls coming in were about this, and about concerns about this. So, you know, they'll know how damaging this has been to them, because it does just bring in that idea that they're not quite what voters might have thought they were. I think that's, but I also want to make the point too that I do think they've handled it reasonably well.
Yeah, I do.
There's a saying that if you haven't damaged a National Party or ACT Party billboard at least once in your life, you're not a real Aucklander. But if the young Nats had planned a coordinated attack, there would be a torrent of criticism. Is there a double standard here because it's Green Party supporters?
No, I think there's been quite a high level of criticism actually, and I think that the bit that makes it odd is the connection to Russell Norman's office via the guy's partner. It just has made it closer, and they obviously moved very quickly to deal with that yesterday. I'm not suggesting for a moment that actually this did have any kind of sanction from the Greens. They wouldn't be stupid enough to do that. But you know, these are Green Party members. This was a Green Party member, and as I say, the feedback I've been getting from people is they've noticed it, and it seems to sully that brand for them.
I absolutely take Russell Norman at his word, but I think it will be very interesting to see where this story goes. Actually, were there other parliamentarians, or at least their staffers, who knew more about this? You know, we'll see if Paddy Gower and Duncan Garner are more fixated on the teapot saga than on this.
They will be. You know.
Good try, Simon.
But there's some interesting. I mean, I still think if for an investigative journalist to go down this track, there's some interesting things. We'll see how far it is into the Green Party.
Just to take up your other point, though, I mean, traditionally the Greens poll higher than
exactly
every election.
I can't see that changing either.
Neither
I mean, it's to do with who the big base of supporters for the Greens, which is younger people who traditionally don't get out and vote in the numbers, and also to do with the Greens and whether they've got a really good turnout strategy. They're polling a bit higher than they were, so where they come back to will be interesting. But it's not so much the vandalism.
I think that's right.
Yeah, they have a lot more this year this time around a lot more focus on the online community, and they've really driven that.
Yeah.
I think
Look, they're overall polling higher than they have been, so
Yep.
coming back may bring them back to a higher place.
I think we will be proved right that the Greens won't have the level of support today that, come election day. Now, ultimately, you won't be able to say cause and effect. It was a Robin Malcolm and it was vandalism of signs, because I agree with what Grant said. Look, actually, they always come down on polling.
And so that's blue-green voters who maybe have sort of liked the idea that the National Party, that the Greens had made some overtures to the National Party, but would withdraw that vote.
It might be that, but it is also that very, and I think we can be sort of demographically stereotypical here, that young vote, that vote that, hey, look, may not get out on Saturday because the weather's bad or what have you.
One person's middle-class vandalism, of course, is another's underclass activism. How do the Greens pacify their activist base, who are furious at Russell Norman's snub of the grassroots?
Well, I think this is a wider issue for the Greens. I mean, it comes down to the controversy around their billboards, the rich in New Zealand concept. My understanding is there are a lot of people in the Greens who were upset about that kind of approach. Those who believe that they've gone too far to being mainstream.
Right. Sue Bradbury, of course, very critical to that.
Yeah, and this is an interesting tension. It's actually a tension in all political parties between membership and the actual what you can actually achieve and do. And I think the Greens are facing that right now, because quite clearly Russell particularly wants to see them go in that direction. So this is that tension laid bare, and yeah, we'll have to see where it goes.
Isn't there a certain hypocrisy? Russell went out to Parliament, held up the Tibetan flag right next to one of the most powerful men in the world as activism, pretty much used his position as a Green Party leader to be able to get there. Activism within his own party at election time, he cuts them like that. The activist base pretty annoyed.
Look, I don't know why I'm defending Russell Norman, but I don't think so. I mean, it's a bit like there's a distinction between freedom of speech, getting out there and doing something proactively, and it's the same argument. I totally fundamentally disagree with what Sue Bradford has said.
Right.
Because ultimately, look, freedom of speech is one thing, to put your own signs up, but to go and do something to someone else's sign, look, I think is a bar too far.
And any candidate for any party will tell you how frustrating and annoying it is when your billboards
I mean,
get
both of you know
vandalised.
this, right? Both of you
and
know
it's
this.
expensive, and I'm, so from that point of view, there's no way you can countenance that.
I do think, though, I agree with Grant. There's this tension. So on the one hand, I do think, and I mean, we talk about this Mr. White, right? The guy who's whose partner is in Russell Norman's. I mean, there is a dangerous sort of means justifies, or ends justify the means thing that going on there. But then you've also got, as we've said, that really soft, maybe national leaning, also green leaning thing going on. I survey my electorate every year. Look, it's not scientific, but we do get a lot of returns in. I'm constantly amazed by the number who do tick national and green as to who they will support. Right, that is a definite demographic.
So in terms of activism, then you both have issues with Greenpeace. Well, but based on these on the parameters that you're working with.
I do think you have to be careful when you run an argument that the end justifies the means, right? I mean, I think you have to think very long and hard. Personally, I can't envisage a situation in modern day New Zealand where I would break the law to get to a political purpose. Now, I think there are out on the extremes really of both sides of the political spectrum people who would do that.
Not a Greenpeace member then?
No, I'm not.
Not a Greenpeace member.
Have been in the past. I have been in the past. I'm not now. I mean, I think there are issues and causes in our lives where we feel so passionately and strongly that we are going to push the boat out. And Bomber, you may recall one or two of those with you and I in the 1990s.
That's correct.
And so I wouldn't be as absolute about it as Simon has been, but the point I'm trying to make here is, as candidates, you know what it is to the money and the expense, and that's where the Greens, credit to them. They have been going and talking to national candidates and saying that we'll
pay it back.
Fair enough.
And
politically we know this, right? But it cuts so much across their kind of respectable thing that they've been trying to do over the last few months.
With the market predicting the Greens on 10.9% party vote, would you buy because they're flying high, or short because Green activists and Blue Greens will leave?
10.9, I'd short.
Short at 10.9? Where do you think they'll end up?
Just under 10.
Ooh, you short it? Really?
We're going to have consensus. I'd short, but not by much.
Right.
But
double figures?
No, I think probably just under.
Just under double figures.
Around and about.
Okay, thank you, panel. Moving on to prediction 3. Welfare reforms to intrusively drug test beneficiaries for work
Now,
readiness
here's something we'll agree on.
haven't dented John Key's 93% probability that he will get elected as Prime Minister. Is beneficiary bashing the easiest way to gain votes in New Zealand? Simon, what's a bigger threat to New Zealand? A stoned beneficiary applying to flip burgers or a drunk minister signing a free trade deal against New Zealand's economic sovereignty? If we are
I'm not
going
sure
to
who
drug...
you're talking about there.
if we are drug testing beneficiaries for being work ready, when will we breathalyse politicians as they enter the debating chamber?
Well, on that front, I think there's a difference qualitatively between being drunk behind a microphone and being stoned behind a forklift, right?
Okay, right,
So
okay.
I'd say that. But actually, to take this quite seriously, look, I think our reforms are pretty moderate, actually. And I think if you look at, and it is a legitimate point to say, look, what does the vast majority of, what do the vast majority of New Zealanders think on this? I think they do think it's reasonable that we do apply some tests to people who are taking drugs and need to be work ready, that we do actually stop benefit fraud and we take a hard line on that, and we do do things like look at when someone is on the run, cutting their benefits so that they're not profiting from their illegal activities. I don't think those things are benefit bashing, and I think actually most New Zealanders agree with me.
Would you agree though with the New Zealand Drug Foundation's report when they looked into this policy of denying people benefit if they were tested for drugs, when they came out with the conclusion that this would simply impoverish a group of people who are already heavily marginalised? Isn't this simply going to steepen poverty?
Look, I accept there's shades of grey in these things, right? And you've got to be very careful. And it is true when you have a blanket policy that says X, you know, there will always be those cases at the margin. So I accept that. As I understand the policy, and I appreciate, you know, I haven't frankly been very involved in this particular piece of policy. We're talking about a graduated regime where actually at one end there will be help for drug addicts to get them off. Yes, at the other end there will be sanctions for those who just consistently fail to get themselves work ready and take jobs.
Grant, in the lost decade, I like to call Labour's 9 years in power, Labour refused to reverse the Ruth Richardson benefit cuts because you feared being labelled soft on beneficiaries. Will you reverse National's welfare reforms if you get back into power in 2014?
I'm not the spokesperson on that, so I can't comment on that. But I'm still reeling from Simon calling them moderate because forcing parents or mothers when their children are 1 to start looking for work, I just can't see how that's family friendly. I don't think that's moderate at all. My question around the drug thing is, yeah, sure, there are big issues there if you do have someone stoned behind a forklift or whatever, but I just cannot see that this is the best way of dealing with it. Where's the investment in the programs around drug education, around getting people off drugs? That's got to be the priority, doesn't it? I do think this is a political policy. I can't see how big the problem is, and I saw yesterday some attempts from people to find out how many people are we really talking about here. Nobody seems to know, and so to me it's just the wrong way of looking at it. The whole welfare approach from National is the wrong way of looking at it because it doesn't take into account the fact that the jobs just aren't there.
To come back to my comment on this being moderate and the politics of this, I'm actually willing to bet if we went into Wellington Central Grant's electorate and we talked to people on the street and we said, would you sign up to this, would you sign up to this, and went through the specific policy, they would actually.
That's because we love to bash beneficiaries in this country.
But
that's why.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's easy politics too. But I actually think what people would do, and Wellington Central is obviously a very special place.
Special place to your heart.
But I think the thing that we've got to do is actually set it in its proper context of a program that should be about creating jobs, of actually having welfare policy that is about encouraging people into work. And I don't see it that way. I think sectioning off like this doesn't there. What I think you'd find if you went to Wellington Central was that nobody likes anyone ripping off the system, whether or not they're a beneficiary or they're a banker. And that's really, I mean, that to me is if we're being even-handed about this, then we've got to make sure that anyone who's ripping the system off, wherever they are, and unfortunately we don't hear a lot about what we're going to do.
I
at the
don't
top
disagree
end.
with anything Grant's just said,
Yep,
actually, and I agree with him. You do have to be holistic. You
Yep.
need to make sure that you've got the jobs. You do need to make sure you have a drug
But that's not
program.
your policy.
But that's not to say that these policy steps are wrong. Actually, I think fundamentally they're right, and people agree with them.
All stick and no carrot makes little Johnny a prison statistic, though, doesn't
I
it?
think, look, I think there's carrot.
Okay, question to both of you. In 2008 election, the nanny state was a major theme. But what is possibly more intrusive in nanny state than telling beneficiaries what they can and can't buy alongside drug testing them for work? It's funny what's nanny state, isn't it?
It is funny what's nanny state, and the Changes National announced at their conference around 16 and 17-year-olds and the card and whether they could buy alcohol, which they weren't allowed to buy anyway, did seem to me to sound a bit like a
Dog
nanny
whistle,
state
wasn't
thing.
it?
I think obviously at 16 and 17 we want those people to be training, we want them to be doing things that are productive. I don't think applying that kind of benefit card approach is. So yeah, there's elements of daddy state to that.
There's a fundamental difference between Labor's nanny state of the 2000s and what we're doing here, because here actually there's a social contract with beneficiaries where we're saying, yes, you take money from the state because you are in need, and we accept that, and we don't want you to be in poverty.
Why not
but
do it
actually,
for everyone?
you have some reciprocal
Why only do it for
obligations.
16 and 17-year-olds? Why not do it for everyone then? If that's your logic?
Look, because actually 16, 17-year-olds are often in greater need. They've got a long term where we want to do something about them, as opposed to look
There's
just
no
a few
logic
years.
in that argument.
No, I don't accept that.
None.
But with the market predicting a 93% probability of John Key being Prime Minister, would you buy because Benny bashing never lost anyone a damn vote?
Yeah.
Or would you sell it because the better angel of our nature will show compassion and
Oh,
reject the
I'm going to be
politics of
selling
division?
it, but for lots of other reasons.
Well, you come on, you'd be that's a dead cert, isn't it?
I
You'd be
have
making
some
money.
objectivity. At 93%, I'd hold.
Right. Thank you, panel. Let's wrap the show with final prediction. Simon, your final prediction tonight is?
Yeah, look, actually, I've been looking at the Wellington seats, not Grant's. I think he looks reasonably safe. But Rumataka, the national candidate there, Jonathan Fletcher, really good guy. He only so far has a 23% chance of winning. Look, I would buy that. Similarly, actually, in Palmerston North, it's about a 48% of the national candidate winning. Look, in both those seats, I think the Labour MPs have probably spent too much time in Parliament schmoozing, not enough time in their seat eating sausage rolls and drinking lukewarm cups of teas with constituents. So on both those cases, I'd be buying the national stock.
Labour's in trouble in the provinces, aren't they?
I reckon.
Okay.
Rumataka and Palmy both fall into that camp.
All right. Grant, your final word this weekend.
I was going to say, I mean, clearly I've been eating the sausage rolls with my constituents. That's what's worked out well. And I actually think Ian and Chris will be fine. My one is actually in Auckland Central.
Yes.
I think Jacinda, about, 23, possibly even going down from there. Ridiculously low.
Yep.
That will be a very close race on election night. That's my prediction.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Grant. To my final prediction, John Key walking out of the media conference today should greatly impact the market. National strategy to gag the media by bringing in the police has provoked a backlash. The media know what are on the tapes now, and every day that passes, John Key will be asked specific questions and the pressure will mount every hour of the campaign. There is blood in the water now, and the journalists are about to go into a feeding frenzy. We forget Key has only been in politics for 6 years before he became Prime Minister, and the stress is more intense now than at any other time. It's how Key has reacted so poorly to the taping scandal that is far more damaging than what he's probably said. I'd short National at 45% party vote. Tomorrow night, I'm joined by Matthew Hooton and David Shearer. Follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook accounts for all my latest election updates. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again tomorrow, 7 p.m. for iPredict Election 2011, exclusively on Stratus TV. Until then, get trading.